The things that ordinarily see to it that the country moves on and keeps going and gets itself on the path of progress and continues to maintain that particular rhythm is tied to leadership. Leadership on many fronts, leadership from a political perspective, leadership from the person actually leading, and leadership from those who are considered followers. And so you find Chinua Achebe in his seminal work, The Trouble with Nigeria, get to tell us that the trouble with Nigeria is simply and squarely a failure of leadership. And you begin to ask yourself, what was he really talking about? He had at that point in his life dabbled into politics, met the likes of Aminu Kanu, and have come to see the near impossibility of almost changing anything from being involved in the political parties and in the time and situation he found himself. And as a response to that particular stuff, he gave us that little gem of a book, and you go through it, you get to see the different themes you get to put down there and how we ordinarily can come out of our situation. But down the line, we are here in the 21st century, and here we are at what seems to be the dawn of a new century, the 21st century, and we are still having troubles and problems with coming to understand the effects of leadership and the different styles we ordinarily are supposed to adopt, and what a failure of such adaptation would mean to us and to our very environment. And so you find us going the way we ordinarily shouldn't go. You find us going down the path we ordinarily shouldn't go. You find us going down different avenues we tend to travel through without ordinarily coming to recognize and realize the fact that we as a people don't need to go the ways we've gone. And it takes courage to ordinarily want to get things to work for us and we want to get things to change. But at the heart of our problems here, the we have to look at what has really come to cause our current problem, where we are, what we must do, and how we ordinarily should go. Because if we fail to come to look at what leadership ordinarily entails and why it matters to us, we would continue to go down this particular path. It would just be the case with the Cyclops and Odysseus getting to tell the Cyclops that his name is nobody. And in the long run of that particular story, we get to see when the Cyclops got blinded and he kept on shouting, "Nobody is killing me, nobody is killing me." Nobody came to the rescue of the Cyclops, because why would you want to come to the rescue of somebody that nobody is killing? I don't know if you get the joke here, but it was that serious. Why would you want to save somebody nobody is killing? And so if we don't recognize our problem, we might just not ordinarily come to know beyond the small talks we get to do what our problems really are. At the heart of effective leadership is a vision for the generations to come, a vision for the present, leading into the future, a vision tied to ordinarily the events of the past. While the future might not ordinarily be known, we could, one way or the other, by way of a deterministic epistemic deduction, get to look at the events of the past and deduce from there an induction that ordinarily can lead us into the future and tell us ordinarily how things are. Because if we are to also go by the laws of motion and all that, things don't just ordinarily get to happen on their own. Force have to be exerted, things have to change, else things remain the way they remain. Not in the Aristotelian sense, but more or less in the Newtonian sense, and from the perspective of someone like Kepler. But that was a little digression. Back to the bone of contention down here. We see that a failure in having an effective way of leadership, especially as a collective, as a country, we find ourselves dying, we find ourselves going down slowly, day by day by day, because we fail to do what we ordinarily are supposed to do. You find things like, accountability and institutions remain very strong, and policies would become well implemented if effective leadership is given a chance. And citizens also would come to have a sense of governance, and things ordinarily will get to work for the people. These are the things we ordinarily at the moment are lacking. These are the things we lack currently in our country, and we are lagging behind. The world is moving so fast, and we almost don't even look as though we are going to catch up anytime soon. But that is not the case. But at the moment, what people have found within themselves and what people are telling themselves and how people get to view the situations of our country and how they get to interact with the events that have come to happen within us, within our current reality and even the reality of the past, is a sense of despair. And why are people despairing? They are despairing because what was ordinarily supposed to be the cornerstone of any nation, leadership, has been kept aside, shoved to one corner, and people have just been doing what they ordinarily want to do. And when you look at this closely, you get to see that without visionary and accountable leaders, countries get weak institutions, the policies would ordinarily be poorly implemented, and the citizens definitely will lose trust in governance. And I don't want to be the one who is going to bring the bad news to tell you that people will barely trust the government in a place like Nigeria. Not just that, in Africa, and by extension, global citizens also frown at their government, and they frown at the ways in which the government tries to implement things without ordinarily getting to tell people what ordinarily they were supposed to tell them. And so driving the message back home. You look at the events that have happened in the last 10 years. I don't even want to go beyond that. Let's just keep it at 10 years. And you come to see how a country growing so fast or growing at its pace among its peers as one of the fastest growing economy came down to currently where it is, so that places like Egypt, South Africa, and a host of other countries are topping the chart in terms of economic policies and economic growth, as opposed to the giants of Africa doing ordinarily what it's supposed to do to ordinarily maintain its place as the giant of Africa. What has gone wrong? A whole lot of things have gone wrong. Our institutions are weak. The policies we get to bring in have become a laughing stock to many persons because people don't even want to even look at the budget. When you talk about the budget in a country like Nigeria, when you talk about things like that, people get to remind you one way or the other that thing you're talking about, the budget you are clamoring and the budget you are shouting for and all that, is as a result of people just ordinarily sitting down there for their own selfish interests. And that is what bad governance and poor leadership ordinarily gets to breed. Leaders think about themselves, leaders think about their party interests, leaders think about their selfish interests, and sometimes they don't even know what to do. They just go about bullshitting and saying things ordinarily that don't get to make sense, and with little or no care for the truth, with little or no care for ordinarily what's supposed to be done, with little or no care for how things ordinarily should be done in a place that is supposed to be rich and viable like Nigeria. And so what do you see? A hallmark of leadership has been trampled upon. And so we find very, very weak institutions, from our security agencies to our educational system to the banking sector. You see people just do things because they just want to do things with little or no care for the next man, with little or no care for what ordinarily gets to happen in the life of the next person. Bankers get to do the most absurd of things. Banks get to respond to people when they feel like responding to people, not ordinarily when they were supposed to respond to people. And the list goes on, and the conversation continues, and people continue to die, and people continue to crumble, people continue to remain angry at themselves, and most times don't even know what ordinarily is the cause of their pain, their sorrow, their anger. because sometimes they don't have the mental capacity or the patience necessary to get to trace their issue back to a thing like leadership. That is one angle of leadership. Leadership from the realms of our so-called leaders. Leadership from the perspective of our politicians. Leadership from the perspective of our religious leaders, so to say. We are just looking at one angle first. We're still looking at the angle of political leadership. When party interest overrides the interest of the people and the well-being, it leads to brain dead. And this is what we cannot lay claim of not experiencing in a place like Nigeria. We know these things, we meet these people, we see how things are done. And we ordinarily should do things better, but we don't. Because sometimes we've just given in and we've told ourselves that nothing ordinarily can get better. I don't believe in that. I believe things can get better. I believe the country can make progress. I believe the world can be all the things the world wants to be if it only looks within, if it only look into itself and tell itself that, I'm capable of changing. I have been changing for generations now, and I think I can also change now. The institutions we were talking about, there are so many you cannot even imagine. When you go to the hospital in Nigeria and you want to go receive treatment, there's this doubt and there's this lack of trust you get, this sense of distrust you have for the medical profession back home. Not because we don't have competent doctors, but sometimes you just get to question if these doctors ordinarily have gotten all the treatment, all the trainings and all the stages they ordinarily were supposed to go and all the levels of practicals they were supposed to have carried out before coming to become doctors. And this is something that should not be overlooked. It's not something that we should just wave off with a sense of, it doesn't matter, it's not so important. It's very important that we get to look at these things, that we get to understand how things ordinarily have come down to us and how things at the moment are. Because if patients cannot trust doctors, that's even patients who have the means of going to hospitals, because a large chunk of Nigerians don't go to the hospital for medical treatment. They go there almost as a last resort. One of the first places they do whenever they have an emergency is to call God, is to call the priest, is to call the pastor. While there are elements of faith down there, it's a faith tied to something ordinary that can be attended to physically. And the list continues. You want to talk about the judiciary going down there expecting to get justice. You would wait for a very long time. While there are good lawyers, while there are good judges, while there are good sons and all those practicing, senior advocates practicing within the judicial system, you find it difficult to ordinarily believe that you would get justice in a place like that, because the system has long been managed and mismanaged by people who just sit down there to override things. So that when you hear a name like Gani, you begin to ask yourself, that's a saint amongst a whole lot of persons. When you hear somebody like, when you hear a name like Falana, you're like, okay, that's a lawyer, that's a good lawyer. When you hear somebody like Effiong Inehibe, you're like, okay. Charles Ogo, you're like, okay. So you can handpick the good guys, but there are a whole lot of good guys that would never make it to the Hall of Fame, that would never make it to the consciousness of people. But they are there, carrying out their activities and doing the things they ordinarily are supposed to do, and they are doing it well. To such lawyers out there, we give them our salute, and we appreciate them for what they are doing. But the vast majority of the population of Nigeria will not come to trust the system down there, because they don't really see themselves ordinarily getting justice from the courts. And it's also something leaders should ordinarily look at, gaining the trust of the people back. And how do they do that? They have to start looking at policies that ordinarily will work for the people, not policies that will just be there for their interests, not changing the law or amending the constitution to favor them one way or the other, or to favor the contract and the investors they are trying to bring into the country. They have to be visionary enough to ordinarily look at things from a very, very long-term perspective. It's not the whole idea of just wanting to put out your name out there that you are building something. It's not about just getting, starting a flyover or starting this or starting that and not finishing it. It's ordinarily having a way to go about doing things. It's understanding that your office as a leader needs to come with a vision. You cannot just look at things from just short-term perspective. You also have to have long-term strategy. And you have to put things in motion that when you leave office, somebody coming after you can ordinarily continue your stuff and continue the project you are doing without ordinarily looking the other way. But in the country also, we have seen lots of abandoned projects. The levels of abandoned projects in the country is so alarming. It's alarming to say the least. The projects in the country is so dissatisfying. It's so annoying that you cannot really even imagine what things ordinarily are in a place like Nigeria. But you and I know. I don't even want to claim that generalization, but you know. The same way as I know that we have lots of abandoned projects that would never come to see the light of day, maybe due to international laws and the different stuff that have come down there. But at the heart of this is the fact that we also have to weigh in almost everything and get to see that we look at things from different perspectives and we look at things from the different angles we ordinarily are supposed to look at them from before venturing into different things. What about the idea of accountability? How can we claim to be Nigerians and as citizens and claim to be citizens without even coming to know what goes into the budget, what comes out of the budget, how money is being spent and how money shouldn't be spent, and how leaders just go on their spending spree and we just sit down and look at them and laugh and everybody thinks everything is fine. Nothing is fine. Everything is not fine. We cannot lay claims that everything is just fine. How do you want to just lay claims that things are just fine when we don't even know how money is being spent? We don't even know how things have been accounted for. The level of corruption would ordinarily come to increase when we live in an unaccountable society and when we do things that cannot be accounted for. Be it in Kenya, be it in the US, be it in the UK, be it in Israel, be it in Ukraine, be it in Palestine, be it in Syria. If there's no accountability, system is bound to see corruption coming. And we are not far from such experiences. We are not far from such stuff. We have seen corrupt people come our way. We've seen corrupt leaders come our way, and we've allowed ourselves to be corrupt one way or the other. We've allowed ourselves to come to embrace our levels of corruption, and we also don't almost see any problem down there. But there's problem down here. Because from these levels of corruption and from this level of unaccountability, we move to a thing like personal gains. People stay there in offices and clamor for personal gains and clamor for their own food and for their own heart and for their own stomach and for their immediate family. But the vast majority of the persons down there in a country like this, in a country like ours, ordinarily come to have little or nothing. And in doing so, we leave ourselves to the mercy of fate. And fate sometimes can be a brutal thing, because what is fate? Fate works upon what ordinarily has been preempted in times past, and is being preempted is being done in the current period going into the future. And when we fail to plan, we've already started planning to fail. And when we refuse to think, we have already given ourselves the decision not to think. And as such, when we say we don't want to take decision and we don't want to make decisions, we have already made a decision not to make the decision, not to make the decision. And so we would go into the future or leave the future for our young generations coming with almost little or nothing to ordinarily look out for, with little or nothing ordinarily to get to advance their cause and advance their life in a place like Nigeria. And so we can continue talking from today till tomorrow, and we can continue looking at the ways ordinarily a thing like leadership can come to affect us. But if we don't look at the problem squarely, we continue to crumble. If we don't look at the levels of inequalities we get to experience in a place like Nigeria, we will continue to see, there will be brain drain. There will be fewer and fewer persons that will be granted access to quality education because the Ministry of Education ordinarily would have not been able to meet up to the standard of the 21st century, and many children, as we currently have them, would continue to go out of school. How many persons get to graduate from our universities? How many persons that even get to graduate knowing fully well what they were taught without the harassment of professors and lecturers? And for those who go to private universities, how much do they have to spend to ordinarily acquire an education? These are questions we fail to ask ourselves because education is becoming so expensive on both fronts. From the front of the poor man and from the front of the rich man, we are having what we ordinarily shouldn't be having. That is, if you're a poor man's child, if you're a poor man's child or you're a poor woman's child, you find it difficult to go to school. And if you go to school, you find yourself in public institutions that ordinarily don't pay their professors well. And one way or the other, the professors seek to get seek to get gains from their teaching, thereby selling handouts, selling different stuff, compelling students to get to buy this, a thing we've seen for a very long time. And then in and about when those type of deals go on, the gods also comes in to do things like malpractice and people get to pay. You go to different groups at the moment now in Nigeria, you get to see class reps asking students to come in with different outrageous sums for professors and for lecturers. And you ask yourself, is the lecturer not ashamed? I am not here defending them, but the system has made it possible for them to do that. What about rigging of elections? Who are those that help us in rigging elections? Professors. Our lecturers in schools deployed to different places to go conduct election. What do they do? They sell themselves on many fronts. They sell themselves because they see a one-time opportunity to make money. But when you live life in and about money, it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem for a whole lot of persons. Brain drain also goes a long way to say different infrastructures that were ordinarily supposed to be kept in place to see to a smooth living of life in a place like Nigeria ordinarily will not come to happen. Because when you look at life and when you look at events and when you look at things from different perspectives, you look at things from different standpoint. And one of those places you get to look at this thing is the fact that just get to die unnecessarily. A journey that was supposed to take somebody 4 hours to arrive at, it can take somebody in Nigeria 12 hours and the person is not even halfway there because the roads are very, very bad to a large extent. It's not to a large extent, the roads are bad. There's the number of roads that are good would be negligible when we are talking about the roads that ordinarily connect and should bind people across different communities in Nigeria. And we're not even talking about the substandard roads we are getting from our contractors who are one way or the other related to our law enforcement officers and our lawmakers who get to award these contracts and how they go behind to also get these things. These things are becoming cliches we get to use too often in our life, and when we get to use these cliches too often, we get to lose a sense of pride in what we ordinarily should hold dear. They will tell you education is the key, but you hear another person telling you until you graduate and come and discover that they have changed the padlock or they have changed the lock. They tell you children are leaders of tomorrow. But somebody will remind you that tomorrow never comes. And not just even that. He will tell you, he will point you to his father, that his father was told that tomorrow never comes. And his father was told that he ordinarily also was the leader of tomorrow, and the father never got to experience that kind of thing. These are things we ordinarily don't want to look at. These are things we ordinarily don't want to recognize. These are things we ordinarily don't want to accept in our life. But these are things that are worth thinking about. Brain drain. Where are the places different persons ordinarily were supposed to apply themselves to do things as opposed to thinking about traveling? You know how many persons that leave the country looking for greener pasture, looking for better ways of just having the bare minimum in life? A level of security they ordinarily cannot get within a place like Nigeria. Do you know how many doctors that leave the country every day? Do you know how many parents at the moment are thinking of how to secure admission for their children outside the country? Do you know how many persons ordinarily would have loved to research in places that ordinarily make up for our communities and our local governments and our villages and our towns and our urban areas, but find themselves abroad researching remotely and sometimes not even doing the field work so well? Do you know how many persons who ordinarily would have flourished if granted the chance and the opportunity to function in a place like Nigeria? But no, we don't think about these things. We don't care. Why should we even care? Why should we care? Why do you want to care? They will tell you, it's not my family, it's not me. My family will not suffer. But for how long? For how long are we going to continue like this? For how long should we do things the way we do things without thinking of the repercussion? And this young lawyer or this young doctor or this young nurse who get to leave the country or this young philosopher would find it very difficult to ordinarily integrate. And even if the person gets to integrate into such societies, he finds himself, he lives a double life. He lives the life missing home, and he lives the life in the current places coming from. It's a problem also we are saying with cosmopolitanism and globalization, people becoming global citizens and all that. The borders we live in the world, we understand, are becoming almost invincible, and we almost don't see them, but they are still there. And problems with migration continues to grow. But what if these doctors ordinarily were granted the chance to stay back home? What if these persons were granted the chance of staying back home? What would have become of their future? And how well would a country like Nigeria currently be? Not even in a place like the National Hospital in the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, is safe from this. Not even the orthopedic hospital in Enugu, not even LUT in Lagos. Will you find hospitals that you can beat your chest and say, you know what, we have doctors enough to cater for our needs? I know how my grandfather died. I know how my grandfather died. I say this without fear, but just with serious amount of trembling and with shivers within my voice. Whenever I think about it, I know how he died. I know how I carried him from one hospital to the next hospital alongside my uncle. On that fateful day, we were looking for where to get him admitted. From the National Hospital in Abuja to Gariki, to the different places we went to. The old man sat down there in a wheelchair, struggling for his life. Struggling for ordinarily something that shouldn't be a problem. A man that worked within the National Health Insurance Scheme, giving his time and giving his attention to ordinarily so that a system ordinarily be put in place so that people's life can be insured and people can ordinarily get to safety when they need to be safe. But no, Mr. Samuel Ipole Ojeka died the way he died because the systems in the country don't function. There was no ambulance to even call. We drove him in my uncle's car. We're looking for where to get him admitted. Before we could see a place, we did this. And in Nigeria, when you do this, it's like you've suffered before you could find such a place. He got admitted. And till today, till tomorrow, I don't even know what they were doing. But probably maybe it was just too late. Or was it the period he was even admitted in the National Hospital? Earlier on, before he was discharged. The nonchalant attitude being portrayed by nurses and doctors, sometimes you won't even want to blame them. Because they do this sometimes out of fatigue and sometimes out of the fact that they don't even get paid. They don't even get paid. And our politicians drive the cars they get to drive. And you begin to ask yourself, how on earth did we get to this place? How on earth did we arrive here? And what should we do that we are not doing at the moment? And how should we go that we are not going? And what must be done that we are not doing? Do I want to fast forward 2-3 months later and tell you how my own father died? You want me to tell you how my father died? Or do you want me to tell you how David Hundenyi's father died? Or you want me to tell you how Dim Anthony's father died? Or you want me to tell you how Agnes Otu's father got killed without institutions to get to respond to them? Do you want me to tell you how Coach, a neighbor that lived next door to our house in Panya, died, slumped and died? Do you want me to tell you how Madam Abisoye died? Do you want me to tell you how the different persons die in Nigeria? And we just see this as normal. We just see this as the will of God. It is not the will of God. It is not the will of God. You just live in an economy and a country that has refused to work. And this is just one angle out of 1,002. When you look at the court that sat and looked into Dele Farotimi's case, you come to see the sheer level of irresponsibility of our leaders and how they don't really think and how they should ordinarily be thinking. That was just like a hall. It's even smaller than a town hall. It had windows leading directly outside. It's just as though a typical Mama Buka or Mama Put's restaurant, and leaders cut away with billions. Why would some judges not even want to pervade justice to ordinarily get some sanity in their life and the likes of that, as opposed to the current situation going down there? Because who really cares? Who really care? When was the last time somebody really got justice and got it cheap? When I mean cheap, I mean getting a lawyer and stuff like that, and not paying through family's land and paying through money borrowed and stuff like that. When was the last time a proper election was conducted in a place like Nigeria? Why do you think people will not become disillusioned with a place like that? That is what we see. Citizens become disillusioned. Citizens don't even look at a place like Nigeria as their own home. We get this thing we always say all the time: Nigeria don't happen to me. Nigeria don't happen to Ram. Nigeria don't happen to this one. Nigeria don't happen to that one. Nigeria don't happen to this. For where? Nigeria don't happen to anybody. Now we not just pay the necessary attention we're supposed to pay to our problems. We are the ones that just didn't pay attention to the events that have led to our current situation. And we look at leaders go down the way they go down, and we say nothing, and we do nothing, and we don't even think of what we ordinarily are supposed to do. Because we ask ourselves, what should we do? When you look this way, you look that way, you look front, you look back, and there's nothing to do. When you look at the right, there's nothing left to be done that is right. And when you look at the left, there's nothing right to be done down here. And so people just break down and become cynical and remain there. They don't advance, they don't make any progress. They just stay within their comfort zones and they just hang on there for as long as possible. That is not a good thing to do, but that is what we find ourselves doing. That is what we find our situation telling us. That is what we find ourselves championing. That is what we find ourselves doing. Dear Nigerians, dear Africans, these are the things we find ourselves doing. On one hand, we become atheistic, not for the right reasons. just for the reasons that ordinarily our needs cannot be met by the so-called omnipotent God we ordinarily want to ascribe ourselves to. And on the other perspective, on the other hand, on the other way, on the other side, we fail to look at the gross injustice being meted out by our leaders. And we tell ourselves everything is fine. And we tell ourselves everything is working well for our good and everything and everybody is fine. No, everybody is not fine. Everything is not good. And we must work at it, and we must work at coming to do things well. Because we cannot live a disillusioned life. We cannot continue this way. We cannot, because of poor leadership, erode trust in government and becoming cynical and disengaged and disenchanted and stuff like that. We don't want to have this affinity towards civic duties and civic rights. We don't want to vote. We don't want to get voters card because we ask ourselves, will our votes even get to count? Will things ordinarily get better if we ordinarily do things differently? If we ordinarily continue to do things, nothing will change. Because we've told ourselves one way or the other that, we go get voters card, we go want to do one or two things, we want to get involved in situations, we want to change the country, we want to see to it that our sons and our daughters don't pay bribe to go to school, and we want them to write the exams well and pass. And every time we try to do something right, we fail at it. Not because we ordinarily are the bad people, just because we find ourselves in a situation that ordinarily is not encouraging. A situation ordinarily that leaves us depraved, that leaves us sad and angry and annoyed. A situation that ordinarily leaves us asking ourselves, how are we going to wrap our hands around the events that have become our life? How are we going to grasp the situation and hold the moment and seize the moment and change things for ourselves? How are we going to do this when the government have refused to look at our lives and look at the events of our situation the way we ordinarily were supposed to look at it from a very, very good perspective? How are we going to move forward? And this sense of disillusion continues. It leads us into the idea sometimes of not even wanting to give birth to kids. You hear people tell you, I don't think I want to give birth to children because I don't see myself ordinarily being able to raise a child in such situation. And so you find people substituting kids with dogs. You find people running away from that responsibility, but you cannot blame them completely. When you look at the level at which the world is going, sometimes it just looks as though there will be chaos, continuous chaos in the future. But it might not be the case. It might not be the case that there will be chaos. It might just be the case that something else will happen. Something else that we have refused to look at. Something else that we must, one way or the other, come to appreciate and tell ourselves that we can make progress. And the fact that the future is not even known is a thing that should give us hope and should give us courage to continue to move on. To continue to move on in our personal life, in our personal stride. Because the future is so unpredictable. You cannot predict the future entirely from the past. The future is different from the past. The future is dependent on how we get to relate with the world and relate with the universe and relate with the different events that ordinarily will get to happen. We don't know what is even going to happen outside our bounds. Maybe a solar body would fall. It's a very, very lousy thing to say. Or some stuff would just, maybe there will be another big bang. Another bang that would just bang things out of here and we get to, not even we, because we'll be gone. Those that will be left or the new life that will be found down here would come to have things done differently. But at the moment, the earth is ours and here we are. And that brings me to talking about a sense of personal responsibility as it concerns the events that ordinarily should lead us right and should lead us well into the future. Because we cannot tell ourselves that, at the moment, the world is this, the world is that, the world is that, and then we just keep quiet. If someone like Martin Luther King Jr. didn't make the effort he made Probably there would have still been a great chunk of people in the US who would have still been disenfranchised. What about Madam Davis? What about Dorothy Day? What about Doherty? What about Thomas Merton? What about the different persons that at the moment we don't even want to remember, we don't want to be reminded of? What would have happened to them differently if they had not, put in their best foot out there and say, against despair, I hope for a better world. I hope for a bright future. I hope that things ordinarily come to be done better. What would have happened to someone like you, someone like me? What would have happened to us if those gone before us did nothing, just accepted the status quo? What would have happened of the Soviet Union and the places of the different occupations the Soviets occupied? What would have happened to Nigeria without Zik, without Awolowo, without Obafemi, without Awolowo, without Nnamdi Azikiwe, without Tafawa Balewa, without the many persons that ordinarily championed the things they championed? What can you do for your country? What can you do for Nigeria is the question I'm asking you today. It's a question we ordinarily are supposed to ask ourselves. What can we do for our country that we are not doing at the moment? And how should we go about the events in our lives to see to it that we get to champion things and we get to champion things differently? What can we do in our situation? How can we move forward? How can we progress? How can we make change? How should we see ourselves into the future? What should we do that we are not doing well at the moment? What can we do better that we are not doing? They're enormous. One of them is tied to our level of disillusion and how we have become cynical to the events of our life down here, and how we just think, one mythic ship will just come all into one of our harbor, either in Uyo, either from Itu or River Cross or wherever it comes from, and lands, and then the Messiah comes down and begins to share palliative and get to change us and get our lives. But it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen anytime soon. It's not happening today. It's not happening tomorrow. It will never happen. We would never come to a point in our life where Messiah just comes to save us. No. We have to fight for it. It is the place of the oppressed to seek out ways of articulating their oppression, as such, losing the grasp of being considered the oppressed. It is our duty to take what rightfully belongs to us and demand from our leaders, those who are willing to go down there, to do what ordinarily they are supposed to do. Because outside of this, I have never seen an oppressor who just wants to willingly give out a chance of oppressing people. I have not seen. If you have seen, let me know. Oppressors don't relinquish power because they are scared of what will be done to them when they release power or when they let go of their power. Take a typical example from South Africa and the fear of those who ordinarily left office when Mandela resumed, and the conversation that transpired down there. You can look up Invictus, and whose lead actor was Morgan Freeman, and you get to understand the psychology of those ordinarily who were in power and now no longer have power, and take your stuff from there.
Today marks the beginning of a new era in South Africa, as President Mandela takes office in Pretoria, facing issues that range from economic stagnation and unemployment to rising crime, while at the same time balancing black aspirations with white fears.
Good morning.
More.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Brenda, you've had your hair done. I like it.
Thank you, Mediba. Yeah, we need to talk about your cabinet appointments and ministers.
Give me one moment, please.
Yes, Madiba.
After you, Comrade President.
Thank you, sir.
Office of the President, good morning.
Brenda, please assemble all the staff for me. All those who haven't already left.
Right now, all of them?
Yes, please.
Yes, Madiba. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to follow me, please. The President would like to speak with you.
Here he comes. Yeah. He wants the satisfaction of firing us himself.
I'd like you to stay out here.
Yes, but Madiba...
I cannot talk to them hiding behind men with guns. Goimora, Alma. Good morning. How are you this morning? Fine. It's good to see you. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Some of you may know who I am. I could not help noticing the empty offices as I came to work this morning, and all of the packing boxes. Now, of course, if you want to leave, that is your right. And if you feel in your heart that you cannot work with your new government, then it is better that you do leave right away. But if you are packing up because you fear that your language or the color of your skin or who you worked for before disqualifies you from working here, I am here to tell you, have no such fear. What is verbatim is verbatim. The past is the past. We look to the future now. We need your help. We want your help. If you would like to stay, you would be doing your country a great service. All I ask is that you do your work to the best of your abilities and with good heart. I promise to do the same. If we can manage that, our country will be a shining light in the world.
And when you look at the events that played right after that, it took a whole lot for someone like Mandela to ordinarily get to win the trust of those supposedly on the side of the oppressor. And so if you're expecting the oppressor to give you power, I think you have to rethink and recalibrate your steps and look at the ways you ordinarily do things, because it's not happening anytime soon. The oppressor is not giving up the chance of what he or she is doing at the moment. And high time you come to accept that particular reality, the better for you. The high time you come to accept that particular fact that the oppressor is going to cling on to power for a very long time, or the best. Else you will just continue to wallow in your own world and your own imagination and thinking things will get better. Nothing is going to get better from that particular perspective. I don't see anything getting better anytime soon if you and I don't get to do things. And what about global competition? How can you compete with the global world when you ordinarily don't function well? How can our citizens ordinarily be respected abroad and in different global organizations if we ordinarily don't give them the necessary prerequisite that ordinarily will see to it that their life can be at least beefed up to the level that they come to have the privilege to ordinarily come to understand the things that get to happen in different places. And so also within the country, you find the level of infrastructural divide so unimaginably wild that you cannot even think about it. It is both wide and wild at the same time. Because you can look at Makoko in Lagos at a glance, and you turn the other way, you see a different situation altogether. You can look at the level of poverty porn in a place like Lagos, the center of excellence. I say poverty porn because that is what we get to see. We have been fed with poverty so much, and we've been fed with so much debt. We've been served with so much dead things that will leave us visionless that we don't even understand how to go. And sometimes we don't even know our problems. That boy that ordinarily should be on the Forbes list, how have the government placed policies that will bring to it and see to it that someone like him ordinarily comes to function well in a business environment and assess the necessary loan and assess the necessary mortgage, if that's what he wants to do, to get to live a stable life that will lead him to ordinarily get to champion the necessary innovation that he can do from his own point of view. What about a doctor or the supposed doctor that never became a doctor? What about the lawyer or the lawyer that never had the chance to become a lawyer? What about the average Nigerian? What about you? What about me? What are the things Nigeria have robbed you of? What are the things you have told yourself, Nigeria don't happen to me? What are the things that you ordinarily should do that you are not doing at the moment thanks to the fact that you live in a country like Nigeria? What are those gadgets and those goods and those things you ordinarily want to have within the confines of your house, and you want to go online to get to book them, and you go to Amazon and you go to different places, AliExpress, Alibaba, and you try to get them, and they tell you, we don't ship to your destination, we don't ship to your country. What are the ways you ordinarily should interact with such decision? What are the ways you ordinarily should interact with such realities that at the moment your highest denomination in your country, that's the 1,000 naira note, is not even equivalent to $1? How should that trigger you? What should that do to you? Should you just say the dollar is where it is because the dollar is a senior? Or will you go about researching and coming to understand why these things are the way they are? Will you go about looking at things from the perspective you ordinarily are supposed to look at them? Or will you just accept the things as they are, as opposed to the ways in which things can get better and how things ordinarily should be done? What do you want to do? Tell me. I want to hear you. I want to listen to you. Tell me what you think would make you change your current situation. People have gotten so angry in their life that they have changed the way they thought. They have changed their life pattern and they get to a point where they tell themselves, I want to be the change. Look at the life of Booker T. Washington, the slave boy that championed education in the United States, and how he came to freedom, and how he, against all odds, told himself, you know what? I must change. I must do something important for myself, for my family. What about the different persons, even in places of privileges, that were ordinarily supposed to just be comfortable, but they say, you know what? I want to do something different. What would have happened to someone like Gandhi if he just stayed in South Africa and then pretended as if nothing happened? What if even after returning to India, he just played the cool and the safe guy? Would he have been shot? Would he have been killed? What are the things you ordinarily think can be done to salvage a situation like ours? What do you think can be made possible to bring us to that particular realm where we tell ourselves that we ordinarily need to be respected on the international scene? What do you think we can do, and what do you think are the things that have been kept away from our reach, both by geopolitics, both by international laws and international sanctions, that you think ordinarily should change? Because if you're not thinking about this, you also would come to one way or the other contribute to the brain drain that will be the future of the country. Because you might be thinking you are young at the moment, you are in your 18, you are in your 19. It's all about TikTok, it's all about Facebook. It's all about, giving different banter on X, giving different stuff on Instagram, posting pictures and watching different people do different forms of stunts, and you just want to languish in happiness and in, if that is happiness even, or in this euphoria, and you bask in this particular stuff. But for how long can you do that? When you hear that Africa is one of the most sanctioned continents, in the world, what does that tell you? When you hear that we currently are owing the IMF and we are owing the World Bank in our respective countries in Africa, what comes to your mind? Do you go about asking yourself, at what point did they get to borrow this money, or at what point was this money lended to our government, and what is the interest rate, and what would be the repercussion for me, and what will be the problem when they continue to borrow this money because they cannot pay? So they borrow to service the debt and borrow again to service the debt. You ask yourself, what was given for this Trojan horse that was given to our government? Because remember the story of Troy as told to us by Homer, that it was not a place capable of being penetrated by the Greeks. But when they came in with the gift of a horse, it says, Troy burned for days because of a gift. So nowadays you get to hear, don't trust the Greeks even with their gifts. What have been given to the receiver, that is to the benefit of the giver, that made us to come to accept the cliche that blessed is the one that giveth than the one that taketh. Blessed is the one that gives than the one that receives. At what point have we been able to look at this and look at this squarely? The concerns are many. Leadership has to come from twofold, from your end and from the end of your leaders. That is the way we can go. That is the way we should go. That is the only way we can make sense out of our life down here. That is the only way we should do things. The idea of being trustworthy, the idea of being a leader in your own life, in your own situation, and in the ways you get to do things. I am Biringkpa bin Emeka. I am your brother, the mendicant, strolling this world with you. See you next time. Please, if you've been able to watch to this particular point and you do like this video, please do like, comment, and share with your loved one so we continue these conversations. See you next time.